Welcome back to Wok Wednesdays in the brand new School Wok kitchen. This week we are doing my grandma's turnip cake. Turnip cake, the first things first is actually, it takes a little bit of time. You've got to give it a bit of love. It's quite hard to make small quantities of, but depending on your steamer and what size you sort of saucepan you have and your steaming mechanisms, you may want to do less than I'm doing here. So the recipe is about 1/3 of what I've got here, but I just went for whatever weight the mooli gave me. So I've got about 900 grams of mooli or turnip, which is kind of like a long white turnip. So your 900 grams of mooli, and then I've got rice flour and some corn flour to make up a paste. Flavor-wise, we're keeping it really simple. We've got some shiitake mushrooms soaked in hot water overnight, finely chopped up. Well, it's actually a coarse grain of mushrooms, so I want it to have a little bit of bite. We're keeping this veggie, so just ginger, spring onion, salt, white pepper to season. The mooli I've actually got grated for the most part, so about 2/3 grated, and then the rest I've chopped up in nice sort of chunks of mooli because I'll put that in to add a bit of texture to my turnip cake. Now, this is one of the things that my grandma used to cook in literally vats. So whenever I used to go over to Hong Kong, she'd say, "Oh, I've got some turnip cake for you," and you'd have to eat it for the whole sort of 2 months of holiday. I've kept this slightly smaller, but I have got a bigger team to feed. So we're going to get cooking. The first thing is we're going to start to fry off your shiitake mushrooms and your ginger. If you were to go really traditional on this, you would have some dried shrimp, which you just soak in hot water, and also your Chinese mushroom to give it that sort of sweet, salty flavor and texture. But I'm going fully vegetarian on this one. A little bit of oil in the bottom of the pan. You don't want this too greasy, and you also don't need it too hot, so medium heat is good. You're going to fry your ginger. Now your mushrooms, much like if you're using sort of dried shrimp, you want to keep the water and use that as part of your liquid to make up your paste for the sort of caking of the turnip cake. So just squeeze that excess water out. We'll bring it back into the mix later on. So my mushrooms and ginger are cooking through nicely. Now there's going to be a lot of moisture come out of the actual turnip. So we're going to start to season this first with some salt and pepper. White pepper here and salt. But the salt, you do need to season this quite heavily because I've got a fair bit of turnip going into this. So, there's no sort of other flavour that goes into the dish. So season well. I'm also seasoning the mushrooms that will then sift into the actual cake as I stir it through. It's weird having a savoury cake, but absolutely delicious. One of my favourite dishes in dim sum. So my turnip now can start to sweat down. You can hear that water hitting the base of the pan. I'm leaving the chunky bits of turnip for later on. Once you mix those mushrooms in, the salt will start working on the turnip and bring out even more moisture. Next up, turnip sometimes can be a little bit bitter or have a slight sort of bitterness to it. So any sort of brown sugar, traditionally we use like a Guangxi brown sugar. It's kind of like a brown sugar biscuit almost, but this is rock sugar, that's also usable, or just light brown sugar will do the job. I'm going to pop these bits in and just balance out that bitterness with this almost like sweet savoury sugar. Let that melt in. So just have a little taste for seasoning. Just going to put a little more salt in there, just so that stands out. And then the next part is the fun part. So we've got 2 types of flour here. As this is bubbling away, we'll get this paste going. So I've got my rice flour, and then corn flour. I'm going to need a fair bit of liquid to make this paste. So I'm going to take about 3 of these jugs. I've actually poured the extra water from the soaked mushrooms into this jug here. So give that a good mix. And so long as you've got the right sort of consistency of paste, which is kind of like this milky texture here. What we're then trying to do is we're going to make a cake using this, by cooking this paste into the turnip. So you're really looking for a texture, the right texture here in the pan before we then steam this to cook through. Right, so I'm going to pour this in, but you might not need all of this, because what I want is for this to get to a point where it's sort of really nice and sort of jelly-like in structure. I'm going to go for about 2/3 first, just because I know now that my turnip has wilted down to a certain point, and I'd rather it be nicely balanced with turnip and the paste. So this is a really interesting looking dish here. You can see the sort of gloopiness of that. That's taken about 4 or 5 minutes to get to this point of sort of slowly heating that up. And I've been stirring that nicely so it doesn't stick on the bottom. And that texture is, I think, just right. So I haven't used all of the paste that I made up. I used about 2/3 of the paste in the end. But, you know, every turnip is slightly different, has more water or not than the other. You do need it to get to this point where it's nice and sort of gloopy, because we're going to set this by steaming the cake in a second. We're going to steam this in the steam oven because we've got these brand new awesome steam ovens. If you don't have a steam oven, you can set it up in a sort of a hob steamer. That is pretty much ready to take off the hob. Once you've got that sort of gluiness, then we can sort of start to put it into a tray. If I didn't have a steam oven, I'd have a large sort of saucepan with a steamer on top, and then just a sort of deep enough almost cake tin that sits inside that steamer. And that cake tin, covered with a lid, you'll do the same thing. You can see the stickiness of this. Definitely not the most appetizing of things, but once it's set, cooled, and then pan fried to finish, makes an amazing, very homely dish. I know you guys probably know I'm not a massive fan of gloopy sauces, but turnip cake has to be gloopy. We love gloop today. You then want to spread that out into your tray, whatever size tray you end up steaming this in, doesn't really matter. So long as it sort of gets to a depth of about sort of 4-5 centimeters, because then you can cut into it to then fry later. I've got my chunks of turnip that I'm going to put into here as well. They'll just sort of sink into the actual cakey bit. Just scatter those across the top. It's good to push them into the actual mix if you can, because then they'll cook in those sort of chunk shapes and add a bit of texture to the cake. So you just want to smooth that out so it's as even as possible. Then we're going to put this on full steam in the steam oven for about 45 minutes, because it slowly sort of cooks that paste through and sets that into one solid piece. Last bit of flavour, some fresh spring onion. That will sort of lose colour a little, but that's fine because it'll fry nicely. So the turnip cake is pretty much set up and ready to go. Now is the full cooking time to cook that flour through. My steam oven's on full steam. We're going for 45 minutes. If you were doing it in a saucepan, you might need to top up the water as you go. Just make sure there's enough hot water in the pan. So it's going straight into the steam oven, 45 minutes. So my turnip cake has had its 45 minutes to cook all that flour through. including half of my face. So you can see the sort of slightly clearer colour and how jelly-like that actually is. So what you want to do now is let it cool completely, chill it, ideally overnight, and then we can slice into it and pan fry it, do whatever we want with it. So after chilling in the fridge for at least a few hours, if not overnight, you can see that my cooked turnip cake has got this great sort of set texture. And this is quite exciting actually because it come out really nice from here. So I'm going to try and take a little chunk of it. It's always good to oil your knife when you're cutting turnip cake. So the best thing to do is pick that up and cut into it. And again, just oil the base so that this can slip off nicely. If you're going to get your knife underneath, and then pull that off. We're going to pan fry this turnip cake, so I want it to sort of stay intact if it can. But I want them to be slightly smaller pieces, so let's go in quarter there. Need a good amount of oil in the base of the pan. Bring it to a medium-high heat. Not too high because the corn flour and rice flour in there will sort of brown quite quickly. And then take each piece, start to fry that. Once your turnip cake's in, I'd recommend to turn that heat down a little, just so that can sizzle away but not burn. Now you want the base of this to crisp up nicely before you start moving it around, just so that it stays intact. So if you're patient enough with this, you kind of want to just keep checking it lightly to see if it's going to lift off. Give it some time to crisp up the base so it's slightly easier to turn. It does tend to want to stick a little, so just be careful when you get underneath. Give it a flick, and then straight over. So it's possibly not the most beautiful thing I've ever made, but you get a nice crisp edge with a really soft, sort of succulent, turnipy bite in the middle, and it should just sort of melt in the mouth in the middle. If you wanted it a little bit firmer, you could put more of that corn flour and rice flour paste inside. So that nice crispy edge. Bit of chili sauce and hoisin sauce on the side. That was really good. And this dish, if you don't know it, is all about texture. Crispy on the outside, but still got a bite from those chunks of turnip, and the rest is really smooth and sort of melt in the mouth. I love turnip cake. If you love turnip cake and you like these recipes and you want to learn more, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.